All the time I've worked in knowledge management, I've always said in all the talks I've done, hundreds through the years, what the heck is knowledge management? What is it? Before you can talk about managing knowledge, what is knowledge? And so I've always used a definition which says data plus context equals information. You've got a document, you put a profile around it in the DMS, that's the context. Suddenly you've got information, which is, okay, somebody looks at it and says, oh, the lawyer looks at it and says, I see this document, I know it was used in this matter, I was involved in that matter, I know the subject of that matter, and it gives them information more than just the data.
Today on Law Next, in the field of legal knowledge management and innovation, Sally Gonzalez is both a legend and a trailblazer. Over the course of her 40-year career, she has worked both in-house and as a consultant for some of the world's largest law firms to develop and lead KM and strategic technology initiatives. Among the firms where she's worked, Norton Rose Fulbright, Dentons, Akin Gump, and several others. She's also been in several high-profile consulting firms, including HBR, Navigant, PwC, and most recently, Fireman Company. Gonzalez was the keynote speaker at the Knowledge Management and Innovation for Legal Conference held in New York City in October, where she announced her retirement. That made her keynote, in which she spoke about core principles for successful KM, her swan song of sorts. Following her keynote, I sat down with her to record this conversation about her thoughts on KM, innovation, AI, culture, change management, and much more. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you are listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to that interview, please take a moment to learn about the sponsors whose generosity keeps this podcast going. Capture lost revenue by accurately tracking time, anytime, anyplace. Bill for Time, the most trusted legal time tracking and billing solution, simplifies your day with multiple timers for accurate tracking, customizable invoice templates, and online payment processing to get you paid up to 70% faster. It's everything your firm needs to keep billable hours on track and non-billable work off your task list. See for yourself at billfortime.com. That's bill, the number 4, time.com. Now on to today's interview. This is Bob Ambrogi, and I am at the Knowledge Management and Innovation Conference in New York City. This is the second annual edition of this conference, and I am sitting here right now with the person who was the keynote speaker this morning, Sally Gonzalez. Sally, welcome.
Thank you very much. This will be an interesting conversation.
I hope so. Well, I have to confess that due to traffic problems this morning, I missed your keynote. I'm very sorry to have done that. So perhaps
they're recorded, so you'll be able to see it.
Well, okay, good. Well, and perhaps you can kind of help us walk through some of the key points. But before we do that, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I've been in the legal industry for about 40 years. I've spent about half that time as the IT leader, various titles, MIS, CIO, whatever, for law firms, including Hogan & Hartson, Akin Gump, Jones Day, and Dentons, most recently. The other half of the time consulting to law firms and law departments, working in the areas of IT strategy, knowledge management strategy, and implementations. And my clients have been in the UK, in Canada, the US, and to some degree in Europe.
And you're currently with Fireman Company?
Currently with Fireman Company, although this is my retirement year. So
this is your swan song.
That's right. So it's my fourth retirement, and I'm sticking to it.
I still haven't gotten to my first one. I'm looking forward to my fourth one.
Yeah, the pandemic got in the way of my first one. What else was I going to do but continue working, right?
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, congratulations on that. Again, I'd love to talk a little bit about what you talked about this morning without knowing what you talked about this morning. But I'm just kind of curious on just kind of your general thoughts on how this field of knowledge management has kind of evolved over the last 10 years or so, because it seems like it's a very much different profession now than it was just a decade or so ago.
Yeah, I had a slide on that, which is something I've talked about, is just the evolution of knowledge management. Actually, I go back to the 80s with that, with what I call KM 1.0, which is when it was very internally focused within the firm. It was about making lawyers better lawyers. And so it was know-how, current awareness, and helping develop young lawyers, professional development for associates. 2.0 came out probably right around 2000, which was when law firms actually decided that they were going to market, that it was important to, in fact, I said on the stage, I remember back in the early 80s and 90s and talking to a partner at a major firm talking about the businesses. Sally, we're not a business. We are a professional organization. And marketing was against the ABA's code of ethics for years. So once they started marketing, KM then said, okay, well, let's figure out how we can support marketing. How can we help find clients, do business development, share knowledge with clients, understand our clients, and frankly, understand the work that we all do so that people can find the lawyers and do cross-selling and referrals and all of that. The third stage, I think, came probably, to your point, about 10 years ago when legal process improvement and legal project management came in. And so KM kind of morphed there, trying to support those initiatives. And the last couple of years, of course, you got AI and big data as the big focus or the big change, I think, in knowledge management.
Yeah, and the whole merger or marriage of the sort of knowledge management and innovation, as the name of this conference suggests.
Correct.
Those roles have really kind of come together. To me, again, I'm not directly in the field, I'm an observer, but it seemed to be that's really happened more even in just the last 5 years or so.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Is that right?
Yeah, KM really provides the tools, and I think when innovation, the same with legal project management, legal process improvement started, as firms started to move into those areas, they actually started to realize that they needed the knowledge management foundations. A lot of them were based on automating processes, right? So you need model documents and forms and those kind of materials. And if firms did not have mature KM programs and tried to jump in straight at legal project management or even now at AI, if you don't have those underpinnings, you're not going to get very far very fast. You end up building little silos where they have maybe the depth of having the model forms and the documents and underpinning, but it's not firm-wide. It will be in the particular niche that they've decided to try and take to market.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Yeah. And again, you may have talked about this morning. My apologies for not knowing, but how do you see, you mentioned AI a couple of times, how do you see that as impacting knowledge management?
All the time I've worked in knowledge management, I've always said in all the talks I've done, hundreds through the years, what the heck is knowledge management? What is it? Before you can talk about managing knowledge, what is knowledge? And so I've always used a definition which says data plus context equals information. So you've got a document, you put a profile around it in the DMS, that's the context. Suddenly you've got information, which is, okay, somebody looks at it and says, a lawyer looks at it and says, I see this document, I know it was used in this matter, I was involved in that matter, I know the subject of that matter, and it gives them information more than just the data. And that's very often, that's where technology plays. And quite honestly, I think, particularly in the US, 90% of what we call knowledge management is really information management. The next step is knowledge. So what is knowledge? Information plus experience equals knowledge. Knowledge can only exist in a person's head. It cannot exist to date in a machine. If you look at knowledge management from the UK perspective, they're far more mature than we are for years. It was often headed by professional development. The major emphasis was to kind of take the information, get people to apply their experience, and then become part of the legal practice in their head. So the answer to your question is, I think AI right now has got a lot of potential in facilitating the technology side, the data plus context getting to information, great ways to help people discover information faster, go through digesting of the documents and all, but it doesn't address the human knowledge side. How are you going to get skeptical lawyers to trust what's produced by these AI engines? That's a big question for the future, right? Can AI ever actually help train young lawyers?
Yeah.
Big question. So those
right.
The positives. AI is very positive on the technology side of knowledge, the information management. I think it's got a much bigger challenge on the human side.
Yeah. Is it a question that you think that the answer is we should be moving in that direction, that we should be getting to that point where we can trust that output, or?
Well, who knows? But I hope it's 30 or 50 years before we actually think that AI actually has experience that really is getting to the human level of things.
Yeah, 30 to 50 years. You're not an optimist about it.
Well, I know,
or you're a realist, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, well, I know it's kind of a philosophical question. If
Yeah.
AI can actually contain experience, how are they different from humans?
Yeah,
How
right.
does it become different? And of course, that's
Yeah.
a whole question everybody's debating.
Yeah.
But the other thing I say with knowledge management is, I quote Tom Davenport, if you're spending more than 30% of your knowledge efforts on technology, you will fail. And I would like to take the money you're going to spend, I'll go to Las Vegas, and you have a better chance of winning. And I'm a terrible gambler. So I think the AI it can suck too much of the energy out of the bigger knowledge management programs. You got to focus on the people, the processes, the scope of what you're doing, measuring success. If you don't focus on all of those areas in anything you're achieving, you will not have a successful initiative. And so the AI can help you with the technology, but it can't help you with the people or the process or the culture change or the measures. Probably helps you a little bit with the measures because you can probably get into the data for measures successfully. So it's just a piece of your toolkit. But I think the temptation is to let it be everything, a substitute for the components of a fully composed program.
Yeah. So your talk this morning, the title of it was Core Principles for Successful Knowledge Management. Was that core principle number one? I mean, were you just talking about in terms of people, process, and understanding what the measurement?
I started off talking about the core. First thing to do is have yourself a strategic vision and have yourself a strategic plan, and how to build those and how to use those to communicate with firm leadership, to build support for what you're doing, to communicate with your peers, to communicate with your staff, to communicate with your providers, to not skip that very important step of having a vision and then having the plan to execute the vision. And that even when your firm doesn't want to hear it, and even when they don't want to listen to it, you've got to have it for yourself, because otherwise you just have activity.
Yeah.
You don't have progress.
Yeah. What should that vision look like? I mean, what's an appropriate sort of set of goals for a knowledge management program?
It's going to be firm specific. So the vision tells you why you're doing something and what you're going to do. So the why is the business drivers. What are the business pressures that your firm is feeling at the given point in time? And I always suggest that people, the question I ask in my consulting, I talk to the practice leaders or the leadership of the firm. I said, what keeps you awake at night? What are the things that you're worried about? Don't make it technology. Just what are the things that keep you awake? And it can be all over the map. It can be we need to expand our business. We need to expand to Canada. It could be we need to attract better associate talent. It can be all over the place.
Yeah.
Those are the drivers whenever you identify those. And then you have to say to yourself, okay, so what can I do within the scope of KM and innovation to help the firm achieve those specific business goals? And put that together usually in no more than 5 pages, hopefully 2, which should be very short, pithy, it communicates to the leadership. That's your vision. And then your plan is how am I going to execute? Mm-hmm. And that's where I come back to those 6 building blocks. And your plan has to say, what cultural barriers do I have and how am I going to overcome them? What is the scope? What are the specific things out of those things I listed? Am I worried about know-how? Am I worried about legal process improvement? Am I worried about solving the big data problem of the firm? What is that there? What are the processes that are going to be affected? What are the people who are going to be affected? What technology do I need? And how am I going to measure success? And firms very much love to spend a lot of money on the technology and time and plan because that's the easy part. But they don't spend enough saying, look, we really have to concretely identify all those other areas and what we're going to do in those areas. And measures, they always forget. Well, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
And you cannot do measures later because if you don't know your baseline, you can't prove where you've gotten to and where your success is.
Yeah.
And they can be very hard to articulate. So there's not a unique answer. I mean, you really have to craft the solution for the moment in time for your particular organization.
Yeah. Is it effectively table stakes these days for firms to have a knowledge management program? And do most of at least the larger firms have them at this point? Or I mean, are they putting you out of business at any point, or are they still?
Oh no, they definitely have. The big firms tend to have teams in place that are getting more and more sophisticated, and they're getting much more self-sufficient. For me, the interesting thing is most of the firms U.S.-based firms who have programs develop them because they came into contact with the global firms, with the Magic Circle firms who have very mature programs.
Yeah.
And they realized it was table stakes, that if they were going to compete globally with organization law firms that are far more evolved, they had to have that in play. And that forced them to start to build. And that's why the New York firms are so far ahead, because the New York firms were amongst the first to compete against the global firms.
Yeah. And is it also trickling down more to sort of, the AmLaw 200 maybe, or mid-sized firms?
Not so much.
Not so much,
so
no?
much.
No, it's still mostly a larger firm.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And the smaller the firm is, the more everybody tends to know everybody, right? They tend to know what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Some of the smaller firms are very boutique-y, so they have a very, very niche or narrow practice. They probably de facto already have, without calling it that, they'll have some model forms or some preferred documents. They'll have some best practices, and because they're unified around a particular narrow practice niche, they've got it. They don't know they have it. They don't need to put special people in it as part of their DNA.
Yeah.
It's the mid-sized firms that I think have the biggest problem with it.
Yeah.
A key factor in the adoption and success of a KM and innovation program, Sally Gonzalez believes, is law firm culture. It is differences in culture that have allowed UK firms to outshine US firms in these areas, she says. So how do those cultures differ? And what is the cultural secret sauce that can help drive innovation? I'll ask Sally about that in just a moment, but first, please take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors whose generosity keeps this podcast going. Ready to free up your day so you can spend more time on billable work? Bill for Time's legal time tracking and billing software helps your firm automate time-intensive tasks so you can practice more and manage less. Plus, Bill for Time's simple, easy-to-learn interface and award-winning live customer support ensures that your firm will be up and running in no time. Visit billfortime.com today to learn how you can take your practice to the next level. That's Bill, the number 4, time.com. Welcome back to Law Next. By the way, we are very appreciative of the sponsors who support this podcast. If you'd like to learn how you can be one of them, reach out to us. We'll send you a full media kit. Email Ben Ambrogi, ben@lawnexmedia.com. I'm speaking with Sally Gonzalez in an interview recorded live at the Knowledge Management and Innovation Conference in New York in October. At the conference, Gonzalez, who was the keynote speaker, announced her retirement after a 40-year career as a trailblazer in legal KM, IT, and innovation. In the second part of our conversation, she shares more of her insights about how to build a culture to support innovation and how to drive adoption. Let's get back to that interview.
Yeah, you mentioned culture. How is there a secret sauce to creating the kind of culture that's going to be open to information sharing, knowledge sharing, innovation, that sort of thing?
I spent 5 years working in London. So I spent 3 years working with Freshfields and UK firms in the 2004-2006 timeframe. And I spent 2 years, 2014, 2016, working with Norton Rose Fulbright to roll out their first global knowledge management, or experience management system. It was their first global system ever, actually. And I really saw the cultural differences between the UK and the US that really affect knowledge management in many fundamental ways. And one of them, amongst other things, when the UK was really building their knowledge management expertise, they were lockstep as opposed to the US compensation system. So once you got to a certain point in your career as a partner at X years, you basically had so many points, and that was all you were ever going to make. And the only way you could earn more money was to grow the practice overall, to make a bigger pie, because your piece of the pie was always going to be 1/100th or whatever it is. And so that drove them to say, the culture was there, like, now I'm here to drive the business. So it's not about my practice, it's not about my parochial interests, it's not about my clients, it's about the firm as a whole. And so how do I build the knowledge tools? And they saw those as a way to strengthen the firm, and therefore they very much committed resources to it. The U.S., we've got portable practices, right? We've got isolated practices. There's really no loyalty to the firm. Sorry, I shouldn't say this in public, but I mean, in the UK, since the firm had been there for 400 years, people felt that they were custodians of something. And this has really changed. Probably in the last 10 years, they've adopted more of the U.S. model.
Yeah.
But that culture of being part of a bigger organization that has a longer life than me is, of course, great for codifying my knowledge and passing it on to the next generation, which is going to be paying me through my retirement. And the U.S. just doesn't have that driver. So I think the U.S., the culture is much more self-driven, so you really have to, I've always said people do knowledge management in the U.S., the best thing to do is to think about what you're putting out, how it's going to help the lawyer themselves personally, and if it also happens to benefit their colleagues or their peers or the firm, they'll do a little bit more work, but they have a hard enough time finding their own stuff. So if you help them find their own stuff, then they will give, but they won't give to the general good as freely as other cultures. So it's a really, I don't know if it's an intractable problem, but that to me is the crux of the problem.
Yeah. Is that the same with innovation initiatives?
Yes.
I mean, is it all kind of the same, the same pie?
Yeah.
Not the same pie, but the same
It
approach, whatever.
goes back to the financial benefits, right? What's in it for me? Why should I give?
Yeah.
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
I mean, in the UK, they were saying the same thing. But what's in it for them was that compensation was going to grow because they grew the pie.
Yeah.
But you don't have that model here. It's what's in it for me within my compensation model.
Yeah. I thought it was, I mean, just in the short time I've been here this morning, I've already heard, I think, a couple of people say the phrase, and maybe they got it from you this morning, that you don't have innovation without adoption.
Not for me, but I agree with it.
Yeah. I mean...
You don't have knowledge management without adoption.
Yeah. So is it simply a matter of providing financial incentives? Are there also, I mean, it seems to me one of the other things I just hear from lawyers a lot is I don't have time to think about it. Time seems to be an excuse a lot. And I mean, is there a way to accelerate adoption, taking into account the fact that lawyers are very busy and very hassled and have a lot to do? And how do you address those kinds of issues?
Well, it should be easy. Right, so you've got to make it really easy. So the easier we make it, obviously the time excuse is going to go away. Or finding clever ways behind the scenes without them knowing that they're giving. I've always had, there's a kind of a fantasy about knowledge management that I've had for 20 years, and actually I think AI maybe is going to make this feasible, which is people know more than they say, and they say more than they write, is an old saying. And lawyers are very happy to talk, to train young associates. I mean, the old school is really an apprenticeship school, right? And so if someone drops in and asks, well, how did you deal with this particular legal issue, or I've run into this in the case, can you give me some advice, right? And the lawyer is very willing to, most cases, to spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes talking about that particular topic. Wonderful knowledge exchange. The only two people who know is the lawyer and the person you talk to. So these kind of podcast things, capture it, and then being able to feed it in to a big data engine, which AI could then catalog, which some associate 3 years later is facing that same issue, types in that, and he doesn't get written digest, he gets face-to-face or voice-to-voice advice and counsel from a peer or a colleague.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually pure knowledge transfer facilitated by technology.
Yeah. Does there also have to be sort of incentive that comes from the top at the firm? I mean, how important is the firm leadership to driving these initiatives?
I've never really seen top-down work in the U.S. Lawyers are very autonomous.
Yeah.
Now, again, it works better in the U.K. because the personalities are different.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., that just gets the lawyer's hackles up. So I find it works better at a practice group level. I think a practice group leader with the right personality and culture is better at driving it into a practice group. But again, as I said this morning, I always find it best to enable the willing. Find people who have, and it's usually at the lower level, the associate who's struggling trying to get something done. Find those people, enable them with some better tools, help them be successful, and then let them promote to their peers and colleagues how it succeeded. We have them stand up in a practice group meeting and said, I was facing this problem with this client. Here's the tool I used, or here's what I did, here's how I solved it. The lawyer stands there and demonstrates because, so obviously a lawyer can do it. So the other lawyers in the audience can't say, oh, that was IT who told us, IT can do it, but I can't. Or, no, that was Joe. And if Joe can do it, and he's doing it better, faster, cheaper than I can, maybe he's going to make partner better, faster than I am. So maybe I better learn that. And it bubbles up easier than it gets forced down.
So it's more than just identifying champions, but putting exerting some peer pressure effectively. Yeah.
Well, the competitive spirit, engaging the competitive spirit of the lawyers to kind of buoy you up.
Yeah. Again, I apologize that I wasn't there this morning, but what were some of the other key points that you talked about in terms of the core principles that firms should be thinking about?
Well, I talked about don't let technology take more than 1/3 of your efforts and really make a conscious, that's probably, I called it the siren song of technology. Don't listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I think a lot of people
at this conference are talking about technology.
When they start talking about innovation, there's a lot of talk about technology.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can't do it without it, because you obviously have to have it. It's just all those other, and that was probably the other key message, which is the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And all these other things I've talked about, the people, the process, the culture, the measures, that's soft stuff. But it is the hard stuff. And don't ignore the hard stuff.
Yeah. Well, what about measures? What are your recommendations with regard to measures? I know one was to make sure you have them, but can you be more specific about that?
Well, there's two categories. There's qualitative, right, and there's quantitative. So the quantitative are relatively easier to capture, right? You're going to be getting system usage statistics and those kind of things that you can capture and track pretty easily. And the challenge, obviously, is you got to have the baseline at your start of your project, and then you got to know what changes you expect, and then you got to figure out what data is going to demonstrate the change you expect. And then the tricky part is, what happened that I didn't expect that the data is telling me, and how do I listen to that? And that's, again, I think places where AI and some of these tools can come back and tell you, you didn't ask me about that, but I observed this change over that period, and is it attributable to what you did? Is, I think, a very interesting opportunity. Because you can't answer the question you didn't know, that's always a challenge. But if it can tell you, here's a question you should have asked, and here's the demonstration, that's very intriguing.
Right, so you come into it with preconceived notions, and you have to make sure you have some way of identifying the ways in which it didn't turn out the way you thought it might.
Right, but even if you said, I was a great success by what I expected to, is there some other success that I didn't perceive that actually has occurred? Or has something unexpected negative happened that's offset the benefit that I actually achieved?
Yeah.
And then the qualitative is always challenging, because that's got to be people. You got to do surveys, you got to collect soft information. How satisfied are you with your ability to do X, Y, Z at this point in time? And then you ask that question a year later. Is their satisfaction level up or down?
Yeah. Were there any other points from your talk this morning that you wanted to just highlight? Or
off the top of my head, I made the point with the strategic vision and the plan to say, I'm not sure if I said it here already, that even if your leadership doesn't ask you for it, even if nobody knows that you've got it, you need to have it, or you don't know where you're going, and you don't know if you've gotten there, and you make yourself crazy, and you make everybody else crazy. And that even people at any level in their career, you don't have to be the CKO or the CIO to need a strategic plan. If you're just doing a little project, if you've been assigned to do a project within a bigger initiative, ask the question, what business benefit is my project supposed to deliver? If the person you're talking to can't articulate it, you better move up the chain until someone can tell you. But that helps you know what you're doing in a bigger picture, helps you feel, frankly, more fulfilled, I think, professionally, and helps you contribute to the bigger picture. If you don't know that, you're working away in a way that may actually be counterproductive, and you don't know it. You're not malicious. You just don't know where you're supposed to be.
Right. When we first started talking almost half an hour ago about the fact that you're often asked, what is knowledge management? What about innovation? Do people ask you what that means, and how do you answer that?
Yeah, I put that in. There are so many definitions of innovation out there, and again, I think that's crucial. If you are in charge of innovation, pick your decision. So what's for one, and it's so relative, what's innovation for one firm is old news for another firm. One of the models says, and you usually see it more from the vendor side, there's innovation. One side of it is about product development, and the other is about internal optimization. Right? So if you look at Littler Mendelsohn, I mean, they've been doing innovation, amazing things for 20 years, which is very product oriented. They created new legal products, and they've done that consistently. They take them to market. They've been very profitable with the product side. Other firms say, no, it's going to be kind of internal improvements. That's what, being able to do something internally, but not client facing, not externally, not product improvement. So again, you've got to have your conversations with leadership to say, where should we focus and where are we ready to focus? Firms hate to show anything to clients, so it's a long time before they often do something client-focused.
Right, so it's really part of that whole process of identifying your strategic goals and defining it within the context of that.
And if you're with a firm for any amount of time, this is for both, it's a path. It's an evolutionary path. So something they're not ready for this year, okay, do what you're ready for this year, and when you get to next year, they're probably ready for the next step. In my consulting, I would always do that with firms. I would put an idea out there, and some of them they would say, okay, yep, got it, we're on it. And then we get to a certain point, they go, not ready. And I'd probe a little bit, and they were right. The culture wasn't ready, or the market wasn't ready, or whatever the reason was. So we went as far as they could go. And were they a failure? No, because they didn't get to the pinnacle. No, they got to base camp, and so the next year they're ready to get to camp 2. And that's what's exciting about it as a profession.
Well, Sally, I appreciate your sitting down and chatting with me a little bit. And we're about to get drowned out by the lunch crowd, I think, here. So
so we can join the lunch crowd.
We can go join the lunch crowd. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and congratulations on your retirement.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Enjoy the conference.
Congratulations to Sally Gonzalez on her retirement and in all she has achieved over the course of her stellar career. I'm grateful to her for taking the time to sit down and share some of her insights. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments on today's show, please do so by messaging me. You can find me on LinkedIn. And by the way, I'm on Blue Sky now. Search for Bob Ambrogi there, or just email me directly, ambrogi@gmail.com. If you're a fan of Law Next, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Law Next is produced by Law Next Media. I am your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Law Next.